Um, what if a centuries-old theological doctrine, one accepted by millions of people, was actually just a defensive legal strategy invented for one specific, highly pressurized debate?
Right. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but
Yeah, exactly. But today, for you listening, we are opening up this massive, intricately detailed document. It's simply titled A Theological Thesis on the Identity of the Messiah.
and I just want to say the sheer scope of this document it's something to behold. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a linguistic heavy hitter.
It really is, yeah. So this thesis is written by an author who identifies simply as a servant of the Torah.
Right.
But if you look closely at the header of the document, it features an image that points to this rather fascinating collection
Yeah.
of names like Frank Leo, Moshe Halevi, and Francis Moses Levitakis.
Yeah, it's quite the mix.
And the text itself, it literally bridges Hebrew, Greek, and Chinese to tackle, well, one of the most foundational questions in biblical theology.
And that central question, the one driving all of this, is about the core nature of this identity.
Right.
The author is rigorously analyzing whether the Jewish concept of the Messiah is meant to be a single, specific individual, like a historical, physical human being, or if the Messiah is actually a vast metaphor.
Right, like a collective representation of the entire nation of Israel.
Exactly.
And just to be clear right up front for you listening, we're exploring the arguments and the evidence compiled by the author of this specific document. We aren't here to rule on a centuries-old religious debate ourselves.
No, definitely not.
Our mission for this deep dive is to just, unpack the massive amount of historical, linguistic, and logical evidence this thesis puts on the table, pulling from the Tanakh, ancient Targums, the Talmud, and the rulings of medieval rabbis.
What's fascinating here is how massive theological ideas are almost always shaped by the intense pressures of history.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, the author paints a picture that isn't just some abstract ivory tower debate over ancient grammar.
No, not at all.
It actually functions as a historical detective story. It's about how sacred texts are interpreted, and sometimes drastically reinterpreted, when a community is operating under extreme duress.
And that framing really changes everything. I mean, to really grasp what the ancient texts are doing, we have to start by understanding the mechanics of why.
Right.
Like why anyone ever proposed that the Messiah was a nation instead of a person in the first place. Because the thesis makes it abundantly clear that the whole collective Israel idea was not the original baseline consensus.
No, it wasn't. And the historical pivot point is crucial here. To see where this theological shift happened, the thesis takes us back to the 11th and 12th centuries.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Right, so we're focusing heavily on Rashi, who lived from 1040 to 1105 CE.
And he remains one of the most influential commentators in Jewish history, right?
Oh, absolutely. Monumental influence.
Yeah.
So Rashi was looking at a very famous section of the book of Isaiah, specifically chapters 52 and 53, which describe the servant of the Lord.
Right.
Rashi wrote that this suffering servant actually referred to the collective nation of Israel.
Okay.
And because his commentary was so widely read, this interpretation became incredibly dominant. But the author of this thesis reveals a critical nuance.
Which is?
Rashi didn't believe he was writing down the original ancient interpretation.
Wait, really? He knew he was changing it.
Yeah, the author highlights that Rashi explicitly acknowledged the older rabbinic tradition right there in his writings.
Wow.
He knew perfectly well that the ancient sages of the Talmud interpreted the servant of the Lord passage as referring to the Messiah king.
Okay, so he admits it.
Right. The thesis quotes Rashi's own commentary where he literally writes, and our rabbis interpreted it of the Messiah king. He is openly acknowledging the baseline tradition before offering his new collective interpretation.
So if he knew the older established tradition was that the text was talking about a specific king, what was the mechanism that forced him to change it to mean the whole nation?
Well, the mechanism was survival. Pure survival in the face of brutal polemics.
Right, the Crusades and everything.
Exactly. During the 12th century, Jewish communities in Europe were facing the incredible psychological and physical toll of the Crusades. And alongside that, they faced these incredibly intense state-sponsored religious debates with Christian scholars.
And these weren't just like friendly academic forums, right?
Not at all. They were often forced public disputations. Christian theologians would weaponize Jewish texts like Isaiah 53 to argue for Christian theology.
Wow.
And if the Jewish scholars lost the debate, the community could face exile or worse.
That is, it's like a lawyer coming up with a brilliant, highly specific defensive strategy for one incredibly publicized high-stakes trial.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
But then, centuries later, everyone looks at the court transcripts and thinks that localized defense strategy is the actual universal law of the land. They completely forget it was born out of the intense pressure of the courtroom.
Exactly. And the historical context makes Rashi's move entirely understandable as a theological shield. It was protective. However, the thesis points out that it wasn't long before other scholars realized this defensive shift created massive structural problems for reading the text.
Yeah, you can't just change the meaning without breaking the grammar.
Precisely. By the 14th century, a scholar named Rabbi Moshe Cohen Ibn Crispin pushed back heavily against this collective interpretation.
And Ibn Crispin's argument was fundamentally about mechanics, wasn't it?
Very much so.
Like, he basically said that interpreting the text as referring to the nation of Israel forces readers to completely abandon the literal grammar on the page.
Right, that structural integrity is the core of his argument.
Yeah.
He pointed out that the entire passage in Isaiah is constructed using singular grammar.
Yeah.
To read it as a collective, you have to actively ignore the basic linguistic rules of Hebrew.
And building directly on Ibn Crispin's complaint about grammar, I think we really need to look at how the author of this thesis breaks down the actual ancient texts and their translations.
We do.
Because the linguistic evidence presented here is dense.
It is dense, and the grammatical consistency across the Tanakh is striking. When describing the messianic figure, the text just stubbornly refuses to use collective language.
Right. So where do they start?
Take Genesis chapter 49, verse 10. The Hebrew text mentions a figure named Shiloh. The thesis turns to Targum Onkelos to show how this was understood in antiquity.
And just for context, Targum Onkelos isn't just a basic dictionary translation, right? It holds a massive amount of interpretive authority.
Precisely. The Targums were authoritative Aramaic translations used in the synagogues, and they often embedded the accepted rabbinic interpretations directly into the text.
Okay.
So Targum Onkelos doesn't translate Shiloh as a metaphor for the people. It translates it directly as the title Messiah, utilizing a masculine singular noun.
And we see that same singular focus in Isaiah chapter 9, right, where the prophecy talks about a single child being born.
Yes, exactly.
Or in Micah chapter 5, which explicitly states that a ruler will come out of Bethlehem. I mean, think about the physical logistics of that. A whole nation doesn't just come out of a single small town.
Right. An entire geopolitical entity doesn't fit inside a village.
Yeah, a nation doesn't have a singular birthplace in that geographical sense.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
And when the thesis returns to analyze Isaiah 53, it breaks down the Hebrew suffixes. The text describes his appearance, his grave, and how he was despised.
Right, all singular.
Exactly. These are built on masculine singular pronouns. If the text were designed to describe the nation of Israel, basic Hebrew mechanics dictate it would utilize plural suffixes, like their appearance, they were despised, their graves.
Okay, let me push back on that for a second, just to play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Could Israel be spoken of as a singular entity in the same way we talk about, like, a sports team? You know, the team is playing well, which is singular grammar, even though the team is made up of many individual people.
It's a fair question, but the author actually anticipates that exact counterargument and uses the Septuagint to shut that door completely.
Wait, I'm losing the thread here slightly.
Right.
Why does a Greek translation like the Septuagint matter if the text we're analyzing and arguing over is originally Hebrew?
Because it acts as a linguistic time machine.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the Septuagint was translated by Jewish scholars centuries before Rashi, centuries before those medieval polemics, so it freezes their ancient understanding of the Hebrew grammar in time.
I see.
If they thought the Hebrew was using a collective noun, like your team analogy, they had specific Greek words for that.
Right.
Instead, the Septuagint uses masculine singular pronouns, like autos, meaning he. It uses Greek concepts that point exclusively to a specific human individual, an anthropos, or a distinct literal person, a prosopon.
Oh, wow. So they deliberately chose Greek words that literally cannot be applied to a collective group.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. And the thesis backs this up with the Dead Sea Scrolls as well, showing that the oldest surviving Hebrew manuscripts maintain this exact same singular grammar.
Yeah, the textual preservation is remarkably consistent. The author also points to Psalm 2, where God is depicted as speaking directly to the Messiah, saying, "You are my son, today I have begotten you."
Yeah, the text isn't saying, "You are my geopolitical territory, today I have surveyed you."
Right.
That is a direct, intimate conversation with a distinct individual. So, okay, if the strict grammar demands a singular person How did that translate into the cultural imagination?
What do you mean?
Well, how did the great rabbinic storytellers and legal minds of the Talmud actually visualize this figure? Did they treat him as an abstraction?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
The Talmud treats him as undeniably physically real. I mean, the Talmud is this massive multi-generational conversation spanning centuries,
Ah.
and when the sages discuss the Messiah, they operate entirely outside the realm of metaphor.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The thesis highlights a specific section of the Talmud Sanhedrin 98b, which asks a very blunt question. What is his name? Now, if the Messiah is universally understood to be a nation, asking for his name is an absurd, nonsensical question. But the different rabbinic academies take the question totally seriously and provide answers.
They supply proper individual names based on their interpretations of Scripture.
Yeah.
One academy says his name is Shiloh, another argues his name is Yinon, another says Hanina.
Right.
And then there is a deeply provocative answer from the rabbis, who claim his name is the leper of the rabbi's house.
Which directly loops us back to Isaiah 53.
Yes.
The suffering servant who bears our diseases. I mean, the Talmud is quoting the exact conceptual framework Rashi later claimed was about the nation, but they are applying it to a singular named person suffering a physical ailment.
Exactly. The Talmudic sages firmly tethered Isaiah 53 to an individual, and they pushed that physicality even further.
Yeah, the preceding section.
Right. In Sanhedrin 98, the Talmud paints one of the most striking tactile portraits of the Messiah in all of ancient literature.
The thesis brings up this incredibly striking scene from that section, where the Messiah isn't sitting on a throne in a palace, but he's sitting among the poor and the sick at the gates of Rome.
Yes.
I found the detail about the bandages really fascinating. The story notes that while all the other sick people untie all their bandages at once and retie them all at once, the Messiah unties one bandage, tends to the wound, and then reties it before moving to the next one.
Yeah. And the mechanics of that action are deeply symbolic.
Right.
The text explicitly states he does this so that if he is suddenly called by God to redeem his people, he will not be delayed for even a fraction of a moment. He is maintaining a state of perpetual readiness.
But why the gates of Rome, though? Is this a powerful metaphor for the Messiah sitting right in the heart of the oppressing empire, operating subversively while waiting for the right moment?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the era, Rome was the ultimate oppressor of the Jewish people. So placing him at the gates of the capital is a profound symbol of resistance. But the author of the thesis emphasizes the literalness required for the story to function.
Okay.
A nation or a piece of land cannot sit at a city gate. A collective metaphor cannot meticulously untie and retie bandages one by one.
No, of course not.
This requires hands, a mind, and a singular focused will. It is a deeply human action.
It's a vivid, almost cinematic image. A king performing first aid on himself, just waiting for the signal to move.
Yeah.
But if the grammar demands a singular person and the stories visualize a physical man, how did that translate into actual binding law for everyday people? Like, did the massive encyclopedic rulebooks leave room for metaphors?
Not at all. For the legal framework, the thesis turns to Maimonides, the Rambam, who is arguably the most important codifier of Jewish law in history.
Right.
In his masterwork, specifically the section called Hilkot Melachim, the Laws of Kings Maimonides, doesn't speak in poetry. He provides a strict empirical checklist for identifying the Messiah.
And it's a checklist that demands physical, historical action.
Yes.
He must be a king from the house of David. He must study the Torah and observe the commandments. He must fight the wars of God. He must build the temple in its original place and gather the exiles of Israel.
Maimonides codified this to serve as a legal barrier against false messiahs, which were a very real problem in his era.
That makes sense.
A piece of land cannot study the Torah. A nation cannot, as a single entity, be a king from the line of David. The legal criteria require a human agent. And the thesis reinforces this by bringing in Nachmanides, the Ramban.
Oh, right. During the Disputation of Barcelona in 1263?
Yes, which was another one of those intense, high-stakes public debates we talked about.
Yeah.
But during this disputation, Nachmanides stated explicitly on the public record that the Messiah is a specific human being who has not yet arrived. He did not retreat into a collective metaphor.
And the thesis also brings up Rabbi Akiva, which I think grounds this perfectly in history.
It does.
Rabbi Akiva was one of the absolute greatest sages of the 2nd century, and he threw his full support behind a man named Bar Kokhba, believing him to be the Messiah.
Right, and Bar Kokhba was a fierce military leader who led a massive ultimately doomed rebellion against the Roman Empire.
Right. And while history proved Rabbi Akiva wrong about Bar Kokhba being the Messiah, his endorsement proves the author's underlying point.
Exactly.
Rabbi Akiva wasn't waiting for a metaphor to save them. He wasn't waiting for the nation to collectively achieve a state of enlightenment. He was looking for a physical man of flesh and blood, wielding a sword, leading an army.
Which brings the thesis to its ultimate logical culmination. When the author synthesizes all these texts, the strict grammar of the Tanakh, the interpretive authority of the Targums, the tactile narratives of the Talmud, and the empirical codes of Maimonides, the theory that Israel is the Messiah collapses under the weight of its own logical contradictions.
So what does this all mean for the core argument?
Well, the author lays out these contradictions beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, think about Maimonides' legal checklist. The Messiah is legally required to gather the outcasts of Israel, save Israel, and rule over Israel. If the Messiah is Israel, how does the physics of that work?
It doesn't.
It's the ultimate who is driving the bus paradox. A bus cannot drive itself. If Israel is the king, who exactly are the subjects?
This raises an important question about how theological tautologies actually strip texts of their original meaning.
Yeah.
The author uses the prophet Jeremiah as an example. Jeremiah states that in the days of the Messianic king, Judah will be saved and Israel will dwell securely.
Right.
If you apply the collective metaphor and say the Messiah is Israel, that sentence dissolves into meaningless gibberish. It functionally becomes, in the days of Israel, Israel will be saved.
But yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
No, the ancient texts clearly mechanically delineate between the Savior acting and the people being saved.
And the thesis introduces the Greek word lethos to describe this phenomenon. It translates to an error or a fundamental mistake. The conclusion drawn by the author from all this compiled evidence is definitive. The doctrine that Israel is the Messiah is a historical error. It's a defensive interpretation that contradicts the grammar of the prophets, the ancient Greek and Aramaic translations, the stories of the Talmud, the legal rulings of Maimonides, and just basic human logic.
According to the framework established in this document, the evidence universally points in one direction. The Messiah of these foundational texts is a specific person.
Yeah.
An anthropos, a male from the royal line of David, who operates as a distinct agent in history.
Which brings us back to you, listening to this deep dive right now. Why does a deep-in-the-weeds debate over medieval interpretations of ancient Hebrew grammar actually matter to your life today?
That's a great question.
It matters because it highlights the incredible importance of reading primary sources for yourself and understanding the context in which ideas are born. It is so easy to accept a popular interpretation without ever realizing that the belief might have been forged out of historical stress, political pressure, or defensive survival tactics.
Absolutely. If intense external pressures, like those 12th century crusades and forced debates Rishi was enduring, can compel brilliant minds to temporarily rewrite the interpretation of foundational texts, it forces us to look in the mirror.
Oh, for sure.
What widely accepted beliefs or interpretations in our own modern society are actually just historical defense mechanisms. What truths are we clinging to today simply because, at some point in the past, someone felt threatened and needed a shield?
That is a fascinating, slightly uncomfortable question worth carrying with you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a theological thesis on the identity of the Messiah. Keep looking closely at the primary texts, keep digging into the historical mechanics behind the ideas, and keep asking the big questions. We'll catch you next time.